What is going on, you guys? It's your boy. Listen up, Larry. Here we're back with episode 155 of the video game therapy series. So my mic cut out a little bit last episode, and I narrowed down the culprit to my XLR cable on my mic being old. So I replaced it, and I shouldn't have any more problems with that. Um, my chair had been wheeling over it for probably the better part of 2 years at this point, and that probably damaged the cord a bit. So that's what I get for bad cable management. Just comes back to bite me. But anyway, hopefully, I shouldn't have any more audio issues from here on out. Hopefully, I sound approximately the same. Not totally sure. Probably haven't changed the audio settings, but anyway, yeah, listening is kind of the first topic I'm going to dive into today. It's ironic the amount of time. Now, I realize the irony too of me just talking and not listening during these. I mean, I guess in some sense I do listen to myself talk, but not while I'm talking. I'm much more focused on the act of speaking than necessarily listening to what I'm saying. And, although that, does come with some caveats. I do tend to at least question things I say if it sounds too ridiculous. But if, for the most part, I just let things vomit out of my mouth, and then whatever comes out, I just kind of, let it. But most people spend a lot of time listening to stuff. And you would think with all this time spent, presumably practicing this kind of skill of listening, people would be very, very good and adept at listening to things. But ironically, I don't think that is the case. And I think most people would agree with the sentiment that people in general are pretty bad at listening now. And listening, I maybe we should use a different word than listening. The simple act of hearing is one thing, meaning I understand what you said, in the language. It's not like you're speaking a different language. I understand what exactly you say, but listening to me is more of a agreement to analyze, or an agreement to at least attempt to combine what you've told me into my existing worldview. So you could tell me about something that I don't care about, and I could be hearing you, but listening I'd have to almost introduce whatever opinions or new ideas or facts into my existing worldview, and that often requires some back and forth. Like, you can't just be hearing something and then immediately say, okay, yes, I agree with that 100%. Like, I have nothing else to add to that. That's completely correct. I now am going to hold that belief as if it were my own. It's like, no, most things that you actually listen to are like, okay, like, I might be able to believe that, this kind of makes sense and is somewhat in alignment, but there are some things that still, there's still some holdups, with this information. But people now just passively listen to so much. And again, I understand the irony of anyone who's passively listening to this, falling into that same category. But I just find it ironic that people might spend. I was talking to someone that said that because I asked about how many hours a day they might spend listening to podcasts of their choice, and it varies. Some are, whether it's a politics or true crime or stories about something. I'm not saying all passive listening is equal, but to some extent, it does kind of shock me the amount of time spent. I won't say listening, but hearing things, with the inability to actually listen or integrate things. So I think maybe the differences between hearing and listening are maybe some kind of integration. So if you hear something, you may or may not incorporate that into your long-term memory, or just your or just any bit of your character or being or set of knowledge or facts. Whereas listening is, you're really trying to understand what this person is, not only what this person is saying, why they're saying it, the greater context in which, any important context or any perhaps potentially missing conflict. And the reason I'm so bold to say that people don't know how to listen is because, especially given how inarticulate most people are, myself included, um, the first reaction, if you're actually trying to understand what somebody's saying, should be questions. You should be asking a lot, like, what is that? You use this word, huh? This doesn't make any sense. Like it should be lots and lots of clarifying, follow up, secondary, inquisitive, or even just like clarification questions that you don't really hear from people. Like, a lot of times um, people just kind of agree with you, or just they already disagree, and there's nothing you could tell them that's going to change their mind. So they just go, yeah, no. No, I hear what you say, and they're maybe they're able to recite like, oh, you said X Y Z, and recite the exact same sentence. But to me, there is a patentable difference, not legally patentable, but a significant difference between just being able to recite something that somebody has said with actually listening and trying to really integrate their. So maybe I'm just looking for a word that's a more powerful word than listen. Because listening and hearing are kind of, it's just like, you know, being able to recite something versus understand. And it's maybe this kind of goes back into the difference between, a machine learning model that's able to regurgitate information that, is cogent and makes sense, between something that actually reasons and understands, from any set of, we'll say logical principles. And the logical principles behind, a machine learning thing is just aggregate statistics, which aren't really principles that we can say are have any sense of morality. Whereas I think any human, their organizing principles, I think we're more willing to say those are human principles than something that was statistically generated through an average of humans. Um, Speaking of AI and listening, I suppose, or just consuming things, one more thing does bother me that I'm hearing more, and I've heard this many, many times before, especially around arguments for or against. My argument is against any kind of news consumption, but people have the argument for news consumption by saying that, like, well, I can tell, like, I'm aware of my biases, so it's okay for me to, like, as if saying, like, you're aware that you're too short to play in the NBA is going to make you a better bat. Like, it doesn't matter. You're still, like, being aware of how stupid you are doesn't make you any smarter. Like, in one ways, it's almost like weaponizing a Socrates' like humble position of all I know is that I know nothing. It's like, well, I understand that I'm biased. It's like, okay, if you really did understand that you were biased, you wouldn't, attempt to like use that as leverage to say that you are somehow free from bias. It doesn't make you any. Just because you say that you're biased doesn't mean that you are now, unable to be biased. Like, you still are biased. Doesn't matter whether or not you recognize it or not. And it's almost better if you didn't recognize that you were biased, because at the very least, then you wouldn't be trying to gaslight people into saying that you aren't biased, whereas you clearly are. Like, I've said before that I think humans are just like giant bias machines. Like, that's really all we do is just generate. We take in a bunch of information and then we just turn it into whatever bias suits our. And this really is true of anything. Like, whatever you look for, like, you will find. And this goes too with just worldviews in general. So if you are like more of a cynical person, or or somebody that thinks the world is going to shit, you're really going to see that. You'll see through that lens no matter what. And same goes for someone if you're just this jolly, happy-go-lucky, I don't know, blinded Mormon by whatever. It doesn't really matter what your predilection is, or what ideology or whatever that you've bought into. If you subscribe to a worldview, you're going to see everything through its worldview, and it will inherently taint anything, which can be a good or a bad thing, right? I guess in the case of the Mormon, with everything's great and that the life is perfect or whatever, there's a lot of advantages to that, especially when maybe things, from a relativistic cultural standpoint aren't that great. Whereas I think being a doomer, I've said before how dangerous nihilism is, just as an ideology for people, just because it doesn't, it breeds mediocrity. It doesn't, there's no, I don't see a nihilist raising to the, becoming the greatest version of themselves, which is really which is becoming more and more now of my prevailing philosophy on things. Because I said before how you need to have like your philosophy and whatever the inverse of your philosophy have to exist peacefully together. And mine is, again, and because of that, your philosophy almost has to be highly, not individualistic in the sense that it has to be selfish, but individualistic in the sense that it can only really impact or can only demand things of individual people, and individual people themselves. Now, and give them the freedom to do what they want. It's not, my ideology doesn't impose that people must, but an individual is obligated, to develop themselves into the best version, what subjectively, whatever that is. In the same token, it's if somebody's their version of the best selves is the laziest, fattest, whatever, or is the worst person of themselves, or in any way that they can invert that statement and it still not really violate the philosophy that I, am running with here. And so that way, I think it's a philosophy that can work, at scale. But in general, I just don't think any form of cynical or nihilistic philosophy can coexist with that worldview. But regardless, like given that as the philosophy of how to live, and what to do, I tend to kind of view things as a way. I try to scope things into a way that it becomes some kind of challenge for me, or everything is somehow some path onto making me better, or making every bad thing that happens is some way. Okay, well, this is just some kind of challenge for me. It's not like this isn't a legit. I don't view this as like just an overall negative thing. This has to be some part of some grander or complicated or convoluted, albeit annoying plan to get me to be a better version of myself. So like for example, today I had two pretty big fails. I bought a soldering gun to do these two projects that require a soldering gun. They're just like electronics. And for context, I don't really know jack shit about some of this stuff, which is true of literally everything. I think at most times, everything that I would say I know stuff about now, at one point, I went in knowing completely jack shit. However, I am impatient and I don't like to sit down and do things the right way and read the manual. And like, I understand that I tell people to do that, but at the same time, I'm impatient and I think I should be able to just intuit things and they should just work. Well, there's this mechanical keyboard that one of the switches was broken. Um, so I was like, all right. And it was originally I thought they were hot swappable, so I tried to just rip the key out, and I should have gotten the note. I should have like understood at some point when I was kind of bending the plastic that all right, these are not hot swappable keys. I need to actually solder this out. So anyway, I learned after ripping one out that it was I needed to solder it. So that key wasn't working. It wasn't working anyway to start, so it wasn't like I broke it there. I was already kind of broken. And my plan was to swap it out with like a key that I barely use. So like the F3 key, for example, I hardly ever use. And there's a couple function keys I rarely use, but that's one of them. And so I did that. And, for some reason I decided to swap like multiple at the same time. I tried to swap like the S and the A key. The S key was the one that wasn't working. A was working, but I damaged it trying to rip it out. And I tried to swap those with F3 and F4. And I was actually encouraged because I switched out the S key for the F3 and it worked. And I was like, oh, this is great. Like maybe I'm not that stupid. Of course, then I switched out like F4 with the A key and then A key wasn't working. And this is again with me using this like crappy. I think the soldering gun also sucked because it just wasn't really working that well. I had to kind of use like the side of the nose. I couldn't really use the tip of the nose because it wouldn't get hot enough. So I'd have to like move kind of the side of the nose and it'd be at this weird angle to actually burn the solder. And maybe again I was just being impatient and I should have just waited, for the tip to get hot enough. But either way, I exchanged out the F4 and A key, and then the A key didn't register at all. And I was like, all right, well, maybe it's a bad key. So then I switched out like F5 with the A key, and again it didn't work. So I think I just somehow ended up fucking up or frying the A key, just like not the actual mechanical switch, but whatever solders on the back of the keyboard. So that was a complete fail. And it was because of my hubris, thinking I could just go in and get my hands dirty with stuff. I really should have done more preparatory work, and I did at least do the safety precautions. I think that's one thing I should at least try to commit to myself when I do stupid stuff like this. Is okay, yes, I've in some way I wasted $20 on a soldering gun that I didn't really use properly, and it didn't actually solve my problem. And now I have instead of I mean I still have a broken keyboard in the sense that one of the keys is broken, but now I have a broken keyboard and I wasted another $30 or something on supplies to try and fix it. But at the very least, I did take the safety part seriously. At least I got a mask and wore eye protection and stuff. So I think if maybe that's my only real rule with stuff is like I'm allowed, because the other thing with this is kind of where my financial irresponsibility comes into play, is I really let myself spend not exuberant amount of money, but just like again like $20-$30 here, stuff like that. in order to like fix or try and do something to learn like some kind of new skill. So like this is a perfect example of something like I'm going to let myself buy this, crappy soldering gun, such that I do, one of these projects, with it, hoping that I get some experience and say that, well, I've soldered this or this, I fixed this keyboard or something. And of course, now in this case, I have to either successfully fix something with a soldering gun to say I can use it, or I shamefully am not really going to say anything about, oh, I've never soldered before, or, anything like that, because my only experience now is a fuck up. I do have one more chance. There are two hard drives I have that I think there's a power surge and the PCB on them fried. And I tried just like hot swapping out the PCB, so I, figured out which board I needed to buy because it's two of them. Because of course I didn't learn my lesson after the first one, so I plugged the first hard drive in, it stopped spinning, and I was like, oh, maybe it's just maybe it's just a bad connection. So I was like, all right, maybe I'll just try this other hard drive. So I nuked both of them like within 10 minutes of each other, and of course they were my backup hard drive, so it's not like I lost any data. I'm not that stupid. I almost am that stupid, but not quite. But yeah, now I have to, and of course I just hot swapped the PCB. That didn't work. I actually have to move this like BIOS chip over, which of course requires. I originally thought it just required a soldering gun, but of course I also didn't read the instructions before I bought the soldering gun, and it also requires a hot air gun, which I don't have. So I'm gonna waste probably another $20 on that. See if I can fix that, and if that doesn't work, then I'm gonna be really upset because I will have wasted $50 on two projects, neither of which worked at all. And I can't really confidently say that I've even learned anything besides how not to repair a keyboard and how not to use or how to, I guess, brick. Because the other sad thing is that if I can't fix the hard drives, I've also lose, the hard drives, which are 8 terabyte drives. So they're probably, probably $60 or $70 a piece. So it's even more money that's kind of down the toilet. And I don't know, I kind of let myself do these projects because, I don't know my exact track record, but it's not all losses. Like I have a lot of cool projects and things that I've built because I've let myself just go out on a limb and just buy something stupid. Again, not that expensive, but just, $20 or something. But at the same time, days like today kind of make me wonder, what the fuck, why do I do this? Why do I let myself do these stupid, goofy projects that, clearly I'm not qualified enough to do? Oh, shit. Gotta go. Whatever, I'll just jump out of here. Anyway, didn't want to die there. Because I've not died in this world in a while, so I wanted to avoid that. Yeah, let's move on to something else here. Yeah, I was just I guess let me move on. Let me look at my list here. This list is enormous. I actually need to make something. I can talk about this. So I talked a little bit about just like cynicism being kind of a dangerous, philosophy, and it maybe not. I guess cynicism or nihilism. I guess nihilism I kind of view as cynicism to the nth degree. Like if you are a cynic to a fault, in that sense, you are a nihilist. Like there are things that I am cynical about. So, for example, I'm cynical about AI, but I'm not nihilistic about AI in the sense that I don't think like nothing about AI is valuable and it's all garbage and it's like all over and GG's pretty much. But I would say in general, I'm not optimistic. I'm pessimistic to the point where I generally view most things with cynicism when it comes to AI. But nihilism is like almost a giving up, whereas cynicism is more of a temporary negative view on things. And maybe I'm not really sure pessimism comes into that. I suppose you can kind of group that in with cynicism to some extent. But again, this is wordplay here. We're not really. This isn't the interesting part of the ideas. But I think. I look at advertising, and as a younger person, advertisement really makes no sense to me because, you kind of watch something and you're like, who the fuck is so stupid as to believe any of this? Like, some, a dick pill or whatever it is. Like any of it, I kind of watch and I'm like, you'd have to be so fucking stupid to believe this. But I think, and again, to give maybe a little bit of credit back to the boomers, I think it is somewhat of a generational thing in the sense that, like, they have so many reasons. I guess older people, so Gen Xers, boomers, and just older people in general have so many more reasons to be optimistic because of just how technology has worked in their favor throughout their life. And again, I'm not trying to shit on them. I'm just saying, in general, like things like the internet came around. I mean, even that technology alone, as a singular technology, just the internet, is enough in my eyes to be like a permanent optimist when it comes to technology, right? Some kind of invisible network to connect information. Like information went from like newspapers in your hand, every day, and you're sitting there like desperate for the news, to literally like more news than you can ever consume blasted into your eyeballs. And I think looking at that like throughout the course of a lifetime is enough to be like, holy shit, this is amazing. The world's going to be, we're going to cure everything. Like it's again, I understand how from a younger perspective you're like, who's stupid enough to believe that? But as an older person that kind of was promised these things, or wasn't really was promised, I guess, even less, and was delivered, this was what was just delivered, like the internet. It does kind of seem like enough to be, almost a permanent optimist with things. To which I'll say that I think to the boomers and older people, optimism will ultimately be, their downfall. Now, they're most of them are at the, they're octogenarians or whatever. They're towards the end of their life. It's not like they're have a bunch of years left, but for the ones that are left or will live, optimism kind of is their poison, right? Gambling, get rich quick schemes, like they fall for these stupid things because again they're so optimistic. Crypto rug pulls, they are so kind of gung ho because of the history, really. Because it, to them, like the internet came around and it was just this amazing technology. And now there's AI and these things, and to them it's like it's this is insane. We're living in a sci-fi movie. Everything's going to work out great. Whereas a younger person, I think, so I say boomers, their downfall will be their optimism, but I think younger people, their downfall will be their cynicism, because it requires an optimist. Say what you will about any advance in technology, but it almost inherently requires at least some hope for the future. Like this goes double for like having kids or even really doing anything. Like taking any kind of action requires like some vague form of optimistic thinking in the sense that you think this was going to work. So for example, even my stupid project today that I completely failed on, like that took at least a moment of me going, oh, maybe this might work. This is going to be cool if I can fix this. I've revived a keyboard. It kind of took that in order for me to do that. Now, I guess in this case, I did waste $20 on something that I think I'll have to either take to an actual person to fix, or it's just junk. But regardless, like I would never have tried in the first place. And for the many things I have tried, a lot of them have worked. So it's not like I'm batting zero. I don't know what I'm batting, but it ain't zero. But I'd have to be a little bit optimistic to at least think that would have worked. At any point. Whereas I think younger people that just assume nothing's ever going to work and everything's always going to be trash, I think that's even worse because again, it doesn't make you take any action. It doesn't lend itself towards any kind of active involvement in the world. And so, especially even if you don't think that technology is going to save our, we're going to somehow, invent our genius, our way out of this, if it by some miracle we are able to kind of technology our way out of our problems, it is going to require people that have hope and have an optimistic view of technology and not a negative or cynical one. So I think to sum up this whole thing, I think the downfall of the boomers was their optimism. The downfall of the zoomers will be their cynicism or their nihilism, or again, whatever flavor of that makes the most sense to you. I'll use multiple words again because I think I'm trying to triangulate the meaning here and not get anything exact. My language is not that precise. But yeah. Yeah, this is also kind of another thing not something I want to need to debunk or anything like that, but I just think people get the wrong idea. People, again, especially in my generation, and I've been guilty of this too, so it's not like I'm not pointing at myself with this a little bit. But the idea that there are like Machiavellian evil villains out there running around doing things. I even think of the most obvious examples here are these tech people, like crypto people that do rug pulls, kind of these obvious, I'll say modern day criminals. It's easy to kind of point at them and say it's because of people like this in the world that everything's all fucked up, or because I can't get a job, or the housing crisis sucks. And obviously, like, if you're being nuanced at all, there's a lot more reasons for everything. Like, pointing at one cause and saying this is the reason why X is just silly. And that's also why the news is stupid, is because they kind of assume that, like, oh, the market crashed because of this. It's like, all right, well, okay, maybe like that might have had something to do with it, but to assume that that's like had everything to do with it, or the majority, or like what percentage of the influence was that? Like, how do you know? Right? Really, this is probably the result of tens of thousands of variables that you're not accounting for, that no amount of sophistication or complication could account for. So you saying X happened because of Y is stupid. Again, you could maybe like preface that with like, it's likely that Y had a causal effect on X, but again, to say that like X caused Y, I think is just a silly, is just silly. Anyway, I lost track of what I was talking about there. Oh yeah, evil people. I think it's easy to kind of point at people that do bad shit and say, well, like, this is the reason, whatever, everything's fucked up. I think that I don't think that's really a good way to think about things, and I also don't think are a bunch of evil people around. Everyone, I think, in their own mind. Now, whether or not their mind is healthy or wise, or they have the right incentives, or they're just maybe wired in the right way, or anything like that, I don't think they. Clearly, Peter Thiel or Zuckerberg don't think of themselves as evil. They think of themselves as maybe just like prudent businessmen, or just like, fighting for the good of humanity. I mean, even as silly as that sounds to, any victim of Facebook, I think to them themselves, like, they genuinely think they're doing good. Like, that's not even like like they know they're evil behind closed doors, or they're like, I think they actually genuinely think that they are good people doing the right thing. Which leads me to believe that it's not a bunch of evil people out there doing evil stuff. It is stupid people doing stupid stuff. So it's not that Zuckerberg is an evil maniac. It's that he's dumb, right? And not dumb in a way that he, isn't able to, pass a coding interview, or I don't mean stupid in the sense, maybe stupid's the wrong word. They lack like wisdom, and they are approaching life in the wrong way. And I can say that, as much as I don't want to impose like, you're living wrong, I don't ever really want to put that out there, because that's kind of that's a slippery slope. But I do think there are better and worse ways to live. I think living in a way that negatively impacts a bunch of other people, again, even by accident, right? So it's not even like he's purposely living in a way that is negative, but even by accidentally fucking over a bunch of people, I think is still, you want to avoid putting yourself in that situation. And I think in general, entrepreneurs as a breed take a lot of risk with this, right? Because they all go in with good intentions. I'm sure Zuckerberg started Facebook because he wanted to get laid, or whatever it was, or he wanted to be invited to a party because he's a loser and never got invited to anything. Whatever reason it was that he started, he began with good intentions. But at some point, I'll say, like, again, to use kind of I guess religious language here, his mind was poisoned, by money, or by the idea of impact, or some weird utopian fantasy of technology, whatever it is. Either way, he kind of got things in the wrong way, and then he didn't really recognize when to stop, and when his actions were negatively impacting so many other people. Because he still thinks, even to this day, I'm certain that maybe not everybody, but by and large, everyone thinks that they're doing the right thing. And they might be so far off, it's not even funny. Like, even Peter Thiel, that thinks we should merge with AI or something. I'm certain that he thinks that he is doing the right thing for humanity, and he is a pro-human, or is looking out for the best view. Now, to most of us, he looks like a complete maniac, but it's not like he is aware that he is evil in our sense. Which I think most people don't get. They just kind of assume that these people are like, evil, and they approach them in a way that's like, all right, well, you're never going to get them to change their mind if you approach them as if they're some Machiavellian evil god. Like, these people are just normal people that are just simply misguided. And again, not to give them grace, or to like let them off the hook for anything. Of course not. Obviously, I think they, are doing wrong things, and they need to be punished, at least in some way. But going about it, assuming that they are evil people with evil intention, I think is wrong. They are normal people. They're just stupid, right? Or just foolish, and they're not really living in a way that is conducive to generating wisdom. So I don't know. But people tend to kind of think that they are evil because and this is the other problem with the stupid movies is like people watch movies and it's like the Marvel villain knows that they're evil. It's like no, I mean Thanos maybe was okay at the way he was portrayed in the sense that he thought he was giving mercy to people, and they've done a little bit better, as time has gone on. But I mean, the idea that like the tech billionaires are just these like '90s style comedy evil like Joker people, because again, even movies like the Joker kind of humanized like evil in a way that again provides a nuance. That's why I think that's a rare good movie that was made after 2000, 2000 and 2005. I do think the golden age this is a just quick little aside. The golden age of movies was definitely the early 2000s. Probably anywhere from 95 to 2005. I think when the best movies were made. I guess specifically around like sci-fi, tech, comedy, all those I think were golden. I think anything made after 2010, good luck trying to get me to watch it. And stuff before the 90s, like the CGI is so bad, and I don't know, it's not. The actors are all weird and uptight, and they talk all weird. It's very stiff language. We don't really talk like that anymore. Anyway, that was a quick aside. But yeah, in general, I think it's weird, or it's not right to just assume that everyone's these comedy villain evil. It's like it's just not. They don't think like that. They actually think that they are the good. They think they're the good guys. They think when history writes them into the books, it's like, oh, thank God we had Mark Zuckerberg. like, his genius saved millions. Like, no, he obviously not. But he genuinely thinks that. Like, he's not kidding himself when he, is saying these things and it's on these interviews. Or he does think that what's best for the stakeholders is best for humanity or something. I don't know. But either way, these people are just misguided, and I'm not really sure how to talk them out of it or to get them away from that. I suppose once you get to it, and this is probably the other thing. This is why power should scare people. Is that like once you're in a position, once you're elevated to that, level of I'll say influence or power, who can tell you anything, right? It's like nobody's going to be able to. Even like your mom is not going to be like, honey, what the fuck are you doing? Like stop doing that. Like you're doing evil shit. You're fucking people with people's lives. Like, because you're like, well, fuck you, mom. I'm a billionaire. It's like, all right, well, I don't care. You're being a dick. Like, I don't know who would have to say anything to him or anyone in that scenario to get them to, change their ways. I don't know. I think it's just, it's one reason I think you should, again, the whole genius of the founding fathers of the checks and balances, or just have some of your boys be like, yo, if I ever gets crazy, you got to call me out or something like that. Or some kind of kill switch on yourself to where if you, are kind of going crazy, you can, I don't know. But again, that self-awareness is kind of the problem with a lot of these people. Is they kind of lack any notable self-awareness, and they don't really realize what they're doing. Until not even until it's too late. They just don't. They're just so far. Like their livelihood depends on them believing one thing. Same with like just like weaponized incompetence too, which people have thrown around before, but I guess I'll more clearly define it. Like the ability of like, well, I can't do that. Someone else has to do that for me. To the extent that like, well, I have to stay in my area of competence, where it's like, what do you mean you can't do laundry because that's not your area of competence? Like, it's fucking laundry. Like, everybody should be able to do their own fucking laundry. It's a machine that washes it for you. It's not even like you have to wash the dishes. It's like, well, I can't do dishwash. It's like, no, motherfucker, you can do all of this. You just don't want to because you're lazy. Like, don't pretend like it's somehow like it requires some skill. There's no skill involved. The skill is getting off your lazy ass and doing the dishes. That's not. There's no amount of like, but people will be like, well, I can't do that because it's not, I'm good at spreadsheets. It's like, no, you can also be good at doing fucking household tasks. It's not that hard. You can cook an egg. Just because you get paid not to cook eggs doesn't mean you can't fucking cook an egg. So I don't know. People that are somehow above like low level clerical work or low level just like housework or something are also insulting. But anyway, I'll move on to something else here. Let me get to a safe space. To look at my time. I gotta knock some more things off these list here because it's enormous. Yes, this is also true of culture. I wrote down we deserve a dictator. Literally, I don't. I find obviously I'm kind of joking with that, but in many ways I feel like some people get to this point where you cannot be blamed for anything because. It's almost just like it's the whole thing of not, kind of reserving. It's like, well, I'm this way because of my genetics, or it's like I'm not a very. I heard this today, and this really pissed me off. It's like, well, I'm not like a disciplined person, and this bothers me for several reasons. Who is a disciplined person? Do you know what discipline is? Like, do you know? It's like, well, you're just like doing things when you say you're going to do them, or like sticking to a schedule, or having a plan and doing it. It's like, okay, fine. But do you realize that in order for someone to become a disciplined person, they themselves need to think of themselves as disciplined? And because look, if you don't think you're disciplined, the only way that you would be disciplined is if everybody around you in the entire world organizes themselves to believe that you are a disciplined person, so that you would stick to whatever your habits are. And even then, because you don't believe you're in yourself that you're a disciplined person, the odds of you sticking to that, even if everybody in the entire world, their whole job was to keep you on your schedule and to doing your shit, I think they would still fail because you yourself don't believe you're a disciplined person. So again, this goes back to the whole like firefighter thing where it's like, in order for anything to be true, somebody needs to believe it. And generally, the person that needs to believe it first is you, right? Like if your name is Mark and you want to be a firefighter, Mark has to think, okay, Mark is a firefighter. All right, great. Mark is a firefighter. What do firefighters do? All right, they get a job as a firefighter. Okay, I'm going to go down to the firefighting station and ask for a job. But if Mark never believes that he's a firefighter or is waiting for someone else to tell him, he's never going to do anything. So it's like if you're waiting for someone to tell you, oh my God, you're so disciplined. It's like, no, motherfucker, you have to think that you are disciplined to develop discipline. You're not just born with it. It is not a genetic thing. The idea that like some people are this, some people are that, everything is mutable, especially about stupid things like discipline or, like even being like a talkative person or, being interesting in some way or being a good conversationalist. These are all skills that you can develop. I mean, you don't develop skills by thinking you suck at them. Like you're never like you have to go in with at least the availability to learn, but especially with something as fickle or as I guess difficult to grasp as discipline, it needs to be something that you believe that you have to. Okay, what would a disciplined person do right now? Well, a disciplined person wouldn't run around and go, "Well, I'm just not disciplined and I can't. It's just because of my genetics." It's like if you want to blame everything and everyone else for whatever your problems are, you're going to be miserable the rest of your life. You're never going to be happy. You're never going to find any kind of satisfaction if you're looking for other people to talk you into the way you want to be. If you want to be different, start believing it and start being different. Like you need to believe that. If you want to be a different person, you need to believe that you can be different. But saying that you're not, or waiting until you've been on schedule for 3 weeks, like you're not going to prove to yourself that you're a disciplined person by not believing that you're disciplined. You almost need to have start with a delusional belief that you are a disciplined person, and then over time the discipline will develop. Because all discipline is like sticking to a plan over time, right? It's duration, of I'll say disciplined activities is a thing, right? It's like you can't, waking up one day and being on schedule one day is not really like, oh, Chief Discipline over here did stuck to his his plan for a single day, and as funny as that is kind of the way you need to do things. The first day you need to be like, all right, I'm a disciplined person today. I'm sticking to everything. I'm doing everything I'm going to say I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it. And there's nothing that's going to talk me out of it. All right, boom. Day one, discipline. But you're not going to get through day one of discipline if you're like, well, I'm not disciplined. You're never going to do it. You're never going to have day one. And you'll always be undisciplined. And then you'll run around making excuses for why you can't do things because you're undisciplined. So it's just silly. I hate when people like make themselves out to be like they want to be different, but they accept the inferior notion because that's the way they've been. It's like the way you've been is not the way you are or have to be. Like especially things like that. I'm not saying that like I'm 5'10". I want to believe I'm 6 foot. All right, you can't change immutable things like physical characteristics. But the idea of being a disciplined person or being nice to people or being a complimentary person, like all right, today you're just gonna give people compliments. It's not that hard. All right, do it one day and then all of a sudden like don't call yourself someone who doesn't give people compliments unless you want to be that way. Right? It's like I'm not going to call myself a complimentary person because I don't really want to be. I don't think most people don't even deserve compliments, I guess in one sense. But I'm not really a person that I don't get out of a lot. I don't think people do as well. People are surrounded by compliments anyway. I don't think they need more compliments from me. And I'm not very skilled at coming up with good compliments. And I'm not also really interested in being someone who is very good at complimenting people on their shoes or things because generally it's surface level, right? I'd be a weirdo if I'm running around complimenting people on their wisdom, right? I mean, that is silly, but that would be the thing I would want to compliment somebody on is, wow, you seem very wise. But I would only get to that point with a few people throughout my life, and it's just not worth it. Besides that, every other compliment I could give would be surface level or just not really not something I would pay attention to. I don't care what people wear or their shoes or whatever, or where they went to school. I don't care about any of that. All that stuff is surface level. So I don't really want to be a complimentary person, but if I did, me saying I'm not a very complimentary person would never. I would be. I'd be exactly that. I would never change. And unless I'm okay with that, then that's the way it is. But I think if you want to change, you have to believe. Like, you have to believe what the change is. You have to believe that completely. It doesn't start with this lack of belief. And even worse is expecting other people to believe something that you yourself don't believe. Like, why would everyone else believe that Mark is a firefighter if Mark has done nothing to show him or anybody else that he is a firefighter? It's like, of course no one's going to believe he's a firefighter. He's done nothing, right? He's made no initiative. He doesn't even dress like a firefighter. He isn't, like, he at least needs to, in some way, come across as a firefighter. I mean, why is he waiting on other people to tell him what to do? He needs to believe that, if that's what he wants. If he doesn't, then fine, then you have your answer. But if you want to be a disciplined person, admitting or saying that you're not disciplined is the first step backwards. That's not ever going to get you in the right direction. So don't ever say that, I suppose. And that goes for other things, not just discipline, but in general, I think that is, or just as an example, that's one thing that bothered me very much. Yeah, I guess I don't know where I started with "We deserve a dictator." That's where I begun with that. I don't know how I ended up there, but anyway, let me move on to something else here. Hopefully, I think I can knock off my thing. Yeah, I was thinking about this. I'm not really sure where, and it's probably something that's kind of a moving target, but I wonder where there are, like, not to say 90s style conversations happening on the internet, but just thoughtful, conversations happening on the internet. Because presumably there are. I'm not one of these people that believe that the entire internet is a complete cesspool and there's no saving it. I think there are a lot of golden spots. The issue is just that noise is growing exponentially, and the signal amongst the noise is more and more difficult to extract. At one point I was a bit of a hacker news junkie, and I would go on that every day and waste hours. And thankfully, I'm not. I don't do that anymore. I switched to a minimal RSS feed that wastes just enough time, throughout my day, not any more than necessary or desired. But at one point, I would say that that's where there was a lot of thoughtful discussions happening, and maybe there still are, some. But I found that a lot of discussions on those were very cynical and doomer, and I became a very, a very, I thought I was very informed about the state of technology and how bad things are, and I had many examples that were, thoughtful and things that I could say to kind of gotcha people, but ultimately it didn't really help me do anything, right? All it did was kind of help me be more cynical and, mean to people who use Windows. And I still am mean to people that use Windows because they deserve it, but but I still, I just didn't think it was very healthy for me to be spending time and effort on that. But I wonder where else there are thoughtful, kind of holistic, nuanced conversations happening. Maybe 4chan. Again, I'm sure 4chan is mostly full of probably weird porn and extremists, but I'm sure there are, again, little pockets of things. But again, outside of that, there's not really a plethora of small websites anymore doing that kind of thing. There's a few giant forums, because even things like 4chan, which again is largely unknown to the general public, is still probably has billions of comments and posts and things every day. So it's not like that's a small website by any means. And any large website, I think, is infiltrated by porn pretty much, or just something, just bad stuff. It's not like there's anything good or I guess healthy to view on that. But yeah, I don't know, because all the major platforms, once they get to a certain size, they kind of as a requirement, they almost have to become shitty, because there's too many people on there doing filling the void with either pointless or unthoughtful observations and things. And Hacker News, I always kind of gave myself the exception, because I felt like the people that knew about it weren't as average. But I think over time, a lot more I'll say average people, and it's again nothing against the average person, but the average person will say the average thing. So if you're around average things, that's kind of all you're going to get. Um, so I don't know, and not to put myself above average, but at the very least, I think you can be average in, even below average is not average in some way, or above average and the opposite of whatever you're measuring. But I don't know. So I guess if you have any recommendations or interesting places that you think there are nuanced discussion or information, I would be interested. Kind of, not really. Yeah, let me move back up to something else. Oh yeah, this is another kind of how to live thing. I think, and this might be controversial, but I think one should live like a guest in their own house. And not to say that you shouldn't like take a shit or you have to be polite or say please and thank you to yourself as you open or exit the door. I just mean in general, you should treat the house you're living as like a temporary living space, and as such that you're not like. And what this works on several reasons. Like one, from like a cleanliness perspective, you're generally going to be much cleaner in a place that isn't yours because you're like, well, this is not really mine. I don't really want to fuck it up. But I think you should have that same attitude about your own house, because you'll keep things much more orderly and clean, which I think is a good thing. And second, I also think that it keeps you you're less indulgent in another person's house. Like if you're on vacation or whatever, you're not gonna get up at 11 a.m. to jack off, right? No, you're gonna get up early and make yourself breakfast and kind of be clean about things because it's not your fucking house, right? And I think in general, like especially if you want to kind of clean up your fucking life, a way to do that is to again live like kind of a guest in your own house. Put things away, do the fucking dishes, pretend like someone else is coming, or that you're going to have guests over, every day or something like that. But in general, I think it's easier, instead of thinking that you're going to have guests over, it's easier to think that you are the guest, right? It's not, this is a temporary space that you are lucky to be living in. Treat it as such. Don't treat it as if it's, this is always going to be here. It's mom and dad's house. I don't care, and throw your shit everywhere. That's not, you're not going to be you're going to live in a pigsty. You're going to think like a pig and be jacking off at, 8, 10 a.m. or whatever. But I don't know. I just think in general it's maybe a better rule of thumb to live like a guest in your own house. Like a happy, orderly guest, perhaps. This is another thing about just luck. I think, yeah, there's obviously some skill to being lucky. I'm not discounting that, but there's also a lot more. There's obviously a lot more luck in being lucky than there is skill in being lucky. And the only people that disagree with that are lucky people that think it's all skill. Because in general, if anything happens to you, you think it's because of your genius. Anything bad that happens is just unlucky. But it's it's always a bit of both. But with luck in general, I think there's a lot of patience one has to have in being lucky. Obviously, one needs to wait and be aware of how to get lucky and when when luck is coming or when to try and get lucky. But I think there's also a lot of patience, and most people tend to kind of see things now as they are. They're like, well, all this stuff is bad in my life, and I just need to get lucky. And they're just kind of waiting, but they're not really. They're kind of always taking kind of all the ways that they are unlucky. But I think in order for someone to be lucky, they need to look for luck. They need to kind of seek it out. They need to be aware that there's luck around them somewhere. They just have to find it. And I am lucky actually because of X, Y, Z. But that requires a lot of time and patience that I think people don't really have. People are short on patience now in general. That and listening to are all in very short supply. But I do think people, eventually will get lucky in some way. But you need to be awake and kind of ready to be lucky. You can't kind of assume that luck will slap you in the face and tell you that it's there. Some things happen, that you might think are bad luck that might actually be good things, right? Even kind of bad health problems can be lucky blessings in some way. Like again, the way to frame it is like how can what just happened to me be the best possible thing that could have happened to me? And it might be as bad as like getting cancer or something like that. It's like, all right, well, this gives me excuse to climb Mount Everest because at least if I die, I'm going to go out in a cool way or something like that. Like that again, that's kind of a fucked up, very morbid way to view otherwise desperate bad situation. But ultimately, like, fine, if you are going to die of cancer, would you rather do it climbing Mount Everest or not? It's like, all right, well, then there you have your answer. It's like, I think it'd be cooler to do it that way. It's like, you're going to die anyway. And like, yeah, like you can think about the alternatives, but who knows? Like, you could have died in a car crash. It would have been left you in a coma, and you could have been a vegetable for 40 years. So I would have, at that point, if I'd asked you then, you'd have rather died of cancer. So maybe it was good, actually, in some way. So it's not about like trying to compare, your luck to other people's luck, but just kind of assuming that whatever happened to you was lucky, and then kind of running with it and letting that kind of guide, your decision making, or kind of guide your next steps, thinking that it's a lucky thing that happened and not necessarily something miserable or bad. As is the case when bad things happen. We're very quick to go, oh, woe is us, woe is me, or whatever. But anyway, oh, god damn it. I'm very lucky that I just hit those pigmen, and now I have to run around for 10 minutes. How can this be the best possible thing that happened to me? Well, it'll be the end of the episode, so you will not know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.